Welcome, everyone, to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And on this episode, I'm delighted to have with me Devin Townsend, who's got a new album out called Powernerd, which is at Powernerd even, and it's fantastic.
I like Powernerd. That's even better.
Because I've been talking to Tim Bonus as well, who's got an album out that's got that word in it. That's what it is.
Powder.
Yeah.
I just think of like the Viennese wigs from the 17th century.
And of course, this book, which has just emerged as well, Overexposed and Underdeveloped, which is out on Rocket 88 Books. Now, I want to concentrate on the book a little bit as well, but it's also a book. It's obviously full of pictures, but it's also like an encyclopedia of really interesting haircuts. I mean,
yeah, this is true. Interesting is a very kind word that you've chosen. Thank you.
Well, I mean, rock stars go through so many different haircuts, but apart from a Mohican, I don't think everything was covered in this book.
Yeah. I mean, again, rock star is a very kind term for how I perceive myself and my place in the industry. But I think what I realized through the making of that book is, as somebody who rarely looks back, and I'm not saying that in a romantic way. It's just the truth. I rarely think back to the past. I don't think about high school. I don't revisit old albums and think, wow, if I had only done this one differently. It's just once it's done, it's done. And I think that what that has provided for me over the years is a certain presence for when I'm working, but maybe a lack of awareness of how prior actions have sort of manifested as patterns or things that you are looking to modify. And by having to put together this book and sort of go back to my parents and to old friends and, girlfriends or wife or whatever, and just sort of accumulate all this content and then have to go through each one and figure out what was going on at the time and what you were doing, it's much easier, and in some cases sort of embarrassingly easy, how these patterns have repeated themselves and have ended up where I am today. And the hairstyles, I guess I only use them more as a flagpole to sort of determine which period we're looking at. It's like, oh, that awful mullet there must be 1996, and this collection of budget dreadlocks must be 1989 or whatever, right?
And going through old photographs, though, as a musician, I mean, and again, as you say, you looked at the hairstyles as like flags, but it must have been quite emotionally intense because you're looking at pictures where some things were about to go really well, some things were about to not go so well, and all of this stuff must come flooding back, especially if you're somebody that doesn't look back that often. To put yourself in this position, it must have been like opening the floodgates for some stuff.
It was. And I mean, I think both good and bad, and oftentimes good and bad simultaneously, right? Like, for example, because of my tendency to not think back that often, I've also managed to miss certain patterns that had developed over the years, that by being thrust into a scenario where you are compiling photos, you're like, well, there's, one of those moments where that became significant, and then here it is again, and then here it is again, and here it is again. And to be able to have the opportunity to analyze some of those patterns and the ways in which they've created scenarios for me in my current life that maybe don't serve me anymore, was invaluable. I wish people could have the opportunity to go through that in a similar way that I did with their own lives, because I was frankly stunned a couple of times by how obvious those patterns had become, and I just hadn't the presence of mind to recognize. And to work on this book concurrent with the Powernerd record, or the Powernerd record, which is even better. I think very, very directly informed certain creative decisions that I made, because I was able to see it and say, oh, this is this is a reflection, and these fears are a reflection of something that was unresolved in your childhood or unresolved in your adolescence. And hard as it is to be confronted with that, it's really a gift in a lot of ways.
Because in some ways, if for a young person now, they carry their entire photographic history on one of these, really.
Yeah.
Whereas you had to go through probably shoeboxes and all sorts of things to seek them out.
This is true.
And there would be gaps where there wasn't any photographic evidence, probably a good thing or whatever. But a lot of people don't have that now. So in a way, there's probably more space between these events.
That's true.
Than there would be now for somebody coming through as a younger person.
But I also feel that those spaces are like bridges in a sense, and they're less needing to be documented or discussed. It's like they say, of course, they say that every 7 years, your every cell in your body is
being updated. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a sense, your life exists in those spaces between the bridges. And those are often the ones that seem to be worthy of documentation. I know that, for example, the moment that I'm in right now, post a bunch of things on a personal level and prior to some big decisions that need to be made, is one of those bridges in a way. There's this real sense that what's happening now is a percolation of all those other things. It's like you've had those experiences, you've had these moments, you've had these moments of triumph or loss or whatever. And now it's like, well, how does that solidify into an identity? And I find that those moments often don't need to be documented in the same way. So most of what we have in the book that is presented are the things that I think are pertinent to the story, and those moments between that we didn't document because we didn't have phones or whatever. I think that they were just bridges, and they don't serve as big a purpose visually as when you've landed, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, was one of the songs off the new album, which is one of my favorites, is "Falling Apart"?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's some of it, because as I was reading the book, it felt it was like it was a soundtrack to the text in some places.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the book has had influence on your more recent music. Was that one of the tracks, or was it just because me as a listener, I tuned into that?
I think subconsciously. I think that the way that it manifested in a combination with Powernerd and the book was less about direct influence lyrically, and more about, again, seeing those patterns laid bare, and then by doing so reflecting on where I found myself in this current frame of mind while I was writing Powernerd, and then potentially how that can be mitigated in the future upon recognizing those patterns. But it's less like a direct, I saw a photo and it inspired these lyrics. I've actually never really been like that. My connection to lyrics is much more, when I say abstract, it sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, and I'm not meaning to. It's just, that's really the only word I can think of. It's like words are informed by a frame of mind that is influenced by my surroundings, by my thought patterns, by the media I put into myself, by my diet. All these sorts of things inform my emotional health. And lyrically, for me, a lot of how I tend to put lyrics to music is just reacting to the music and then sorting out what it means later. So I guess I stand by, it's more of an abstract process than a linear one where it's like one photo equates to one song, right?
As I felt as I was going through the book, that as you mentioned, like bridges from one event to the next, the bridges were kind of like in anyone's life. They get longer as you get older because time doesn't seem so instant. What I'm trying to say is, I remember there's a bit when age 15, the arrival of the crimped perm and the pink ding guitar.
Good luck.
Yeah, and then on page 48, whether you've got the feathered hair and the pink cummerbund and you're channeling Tommy Shaw from Styx in that one. but the reason why I've landed there is because within such a small space of time, when that was an expensive guitar for you to get, and at such an early age, you are with Steve Vai, and so that bridge is kind of like, in the scheme of things, is like a footbridge. You just went from so quickly, from grey skies and noisescapes straight to sex and religion. How did that feel to where were you musically to suddenly think, oh my God, I'm with Steve Vai?
Well, there's two things I would say. One, there's no way to quantify the abruptness in which that change happened in my life that could accurately describe what it made me feel emotionally, because frankly, it was just too many things at one time. It was like you go to the 7-Eleven and you fill up your cup with all the different types of soda. At the end of it, it's none of them,
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that way in terms of being able to articulate a specific emotion that relied on it. But one thought that I had while you were saying that I guess I hadn't considered up until now, is that much of my life I've spent feeling like, why me? Not in a bad way, but in a good way. I'm like, I've had some experiences that as a human being, like, the amount of people that will be able to participate in these experiences are huge, or a very small percentage of the population will be able to experience some of these mind-blowing experiences that I've had. And I've spent so much of my energy in the past not wanting to appear arrogant, or not wanting to appear like, these experiences have defined me and gone to my head in a way. And I've gone the opposite direction. And a lot of that's just my own hangups, right? Like, I don't want to appear, it's my own insecurity or self-deprecating nature or whatever it may be. That's kind of how I've approached it. But recently I realized, I'm like, these experiences keep happening for me, and due in part to my nature, due in part to my past, due in part to my talent in the ways that I'm talented, who knows, right? But recognizing that because I'm fortunate enough, blessed enough, if you want to use a term like that, which is awful, but true, to have these experiences, it's almost like my responsibility is to articulate them and be able to draw a parallel through those crazy experiences to something that is connected to what I feel as a person. And in that way, I feel that I can actualize a certain emotional component in the work that references like a basic human thing, whether or not it's like fear or love or death or whatever. And with that, I'm very fortunate to have this huge surplus of information to draw from. And I think that my job, it's become clear to me over the years that my job that's what I do, is I take these experiences that I have been given that are so unique and strange in some ways, and then try and draw a parallel to something about that in my own nature. And that's where the authenticity will happen, I believe, because you're drawing from something that is hyperbolic, right? It's like, it might be a show that we did, or an experience that we had, or filming or something. But what it makes me feel on a human level is relatable, I feel. I don't think it's like so niche that you have to have these specific experiences in order to participate in it. It's like, whatever experiences we have are going to be broken down to like brass tacks eventually. It's like, oh, you're either afraid of that, or you love it, or you're excited by it, or you're bummed out, but whatever it is. And being able to extrapolate that sort of emotional component from an experience and then put it into music is the way that you can connect with people, even considering the fact that these experiences are so idiosyncratic, right?
Obviously, at this stage, you wanting to be, recognized, but as a guitarist, really. And when you met Steve Vai, you weren't even thinking of singing. But and I know in the book it says he basically put you in the basement and left you there until he found your voice. But when you found your voice, your voice is fantastic. This album, I bought it on release, and one of the first things I bought it because obviously it was a Steve Vai album. But I remember listening to it and thinking, the vocalist on this album, the voice is so expressive. It's so full of emotion, and you were. Oh, I don't know if I want to sing on this. Did you, when you found your voice, did that open doorways to new ways in your creativity?
I found my voice later, in a sense.
Right.
What Steve pulled out of me was his perception of my voice. And that's not to say that voice isn't me, but it's me in that context. And it took a long time after that experience for me to make peace with some of those elements that were on the Sex and Religion record, and how that needs to apply to my own record and my own music. And the reason it took a while is because I kept equating it back to his work. I'm thinking, no, that's not me. That's me in his light
world, right?
And it took a long time for me to recognize that the nature of my voice, or at least the voice that I feel comfortable with, is oftentimes not as expressive. It's not that it has less emotional impact, in my opinion. It's just it's less ostentatious, and it's a process of unfolding, And this is also why I feel that my work now is in large part due to the analysis that I am put in a position of having to quantify in order to rationalize the work just in general. But I would even argue that perhaps I haven't even found my voice yet. And the process of unfolding all these experiences leads me in a slow motion way to who I am by the end of it. And yeah, I regret to say that I'm emotionally slow. Like, it takes me a long time to figure out what I'm feeling. Like, it's just the case, and it's always been the case. And I fear it'll always be the case. And so I guess spinning around back to your question, I just don't even know if I found my voice yet, but I keep trying on hats for size and seeing which ones work. And then I keep bringing some of those hats along with me. And I got a lot of hats now, I guess.
Yeah. But you were getting lots of guitars, as it says in the book. You whatever you asked for, you got, and almost. Yeah. Although a lot of people would think, "Oh wow, it is like being in a sweet shop." They didn't feel necessarily they didn't feel they were yours, and also you were kind of pushing back against what would be seen as an archetypal rock vocalist at the time.
Yeah, for a number of reasons, and the getting stuff while you're in LA, because I had an apartment with all these fancy amps and guitars and all this stuff, but it felt like unless it's back home, unless it's in Vancouver, none of these guitars are mine. None of this stuff counts.
Yeah,
it's almost like you're at an Airbnb, and part of it is you can use all this stuff, right? Yeah. And I remember thinking that, man, if I had just one of these guitars at home, I would fetishize it. I would cherish it.
Yeah.
But because it's here, I had no respect for it. And it's like...
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I also feel that one thing I've had to make peace with over the years is that's the truth. Does it make sense? No, but it's the truth. So I think that, again, those things are not mutually exclusive either. It's like how I feel about something versus whether or not it makes sense oftentimes don't line up, right? And as long as you're not acting on it unconsciously and hurting people in the process, I think that recognizing when those sort of dichotomies exist is a part of it as well. Brother, I've only got like another minute until I got to go do another interview. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, but thanks very much for your time. I just want to, the last thing I'll touch on then is Knuckle Dragger. Because I know in the book you talk about the rage, the anger, and the angry music you've done. I mean, obviously the things that made you angry back then, now when we turn on the news, now when we look at social media, do you feel that the things you look back on and thought, this is really kind of where the angst, do you think, well, compared with what's going on now, it's like a walk in the park.
Well, in a sense, it's your reaction to it, though, because my connection to anger as a 53-year-old man is certainly in a much healthier place than when I was 25. When I was 25, I used to fear it, and so I would be very reactionary
Yeah.
to things that I didn't understand because it was a defense, I guess, and now my anger is a lot more like on my sleeve because I recognize it's not an inappropriate reaction. It's a human reaction. Actualizing that anger in overt ways is inappropriate to me, but feeling it and recognizing it is a much different thing. And so my anger now comes out a lot less like I want everything to be destroyed, and more just like, oh, for fuck's sake. And so I think Knuckle Dragger is much more along that line. It's like more of a 53-year-old man's anger than a 22-year-old man's anger, right?
Yeah. Okay, I understand. Well, thanks, Devin, for your time today. And Powernerd is out now. Overexposed and Underdeveloped is out now. And you're also going on tour in about a few weeks as well.
Yes, sir.
And the website is heavydevi.com. So
Devin
take care, and
Townsend.
thank you for talking to me today. Thank you
too,
very
my
much.
friend. Have a great day. See you.
And you. Thank you. Bye-bye. A huge thank you to my guest, Devin Townsend, for joining me today for the Now Spinning Magazine podcast. The album Powernerd is out now. It's absolutely fantastic. Devin talking about still finding his voice. I think he's got one of the best rock vocalists, I'm going to say that, around at the moment. The book, Overexposed and Underdeveloped, is out. And I didn't have a chance to talk about this in the interview, but it really is an open book, sorry for the pun, about his battles with mental health and how music has got him through that. And he doesn't shy away from sharing that in the book. And some of the photographs are incredibly personal, and it really brings home the kind of struggles, that we all have as we go through life. But I think the way that Devin talks about this and goes through all the different aspects of how he kicked back against what was seen as being the rock and roll lifestyle or different things, and his battles with kind of like drugs, etc., but also how becoming a father changed him, and having his son on stage at the Royal Albert Hall. Obviously, he's won Grammys. And I think it really pulls together. It's a great story. And I love the way that Devin talks about the fact that each of these moments is like a bridge to another phase in his life. I mean, all of us are work in progress and on a journey in our own way as well. So the book is out now. So is the album. And go to heavydevi.com for news on the tour dates, etc. But thank you for being here and joining me on the Now Spinning Magazine podcast. Please visit the website at nowspinning.co.uk. You can buy a t-shirt, mugs, and explore the merch for your Christmas presents. And please visit the YouTube channel and subscribe and become a patron or even a YouTube member. And remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Please take care and keep spinning those discs, and I'll see you all very, very soon.